Okay, today I'm going to talk about carbohydrates, and the topic is the chemist's view of carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are composed of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen atoms. And carbohydrates also can be classified into three types, which is monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polysaccharides. Monosaccharides are simple sugars. The following list are the most important sugars in nutrition. There are total 3 of the sugars, which is glucose, which serve as the essential in an energy source and is commonly known as dextrose. Fructose, the sweetest sugar, and it occurs naturally in honey and fruits. Galactose occurs naturally as a single sugar in only a few foods. This picture shows the structure of glucose, fructose, and galactose. Next is disaccharides. Disaccharides are made up by a pair of monosaccharide, one of which is always glucose. Maltose consists of 2 glucose units. It is produced during the germination of seeds and fermentation. Sucrose, which is made up by glucose and fructose. It is refined from sugarcane and sugar beets, tastes sweet, and is readily available. And lactose, made up by glucose and galactose, and it is commonly found in milk and milk products. Polysaccharides. Polysaccharides contain 10 or more monosaccharide units attached together. Examples of polysaccharides are glycogen and starches. Glycogen are the storage form of glucose in the body. It provides a rapid release of energy when needed. Starches is a storage form of glucose in plants, but found in grains, tubers, and legumes. This picture shows the structure of glycogen and starch. A glycogen molecule contains hundreds of glucose units in highly branched chains. Each new glycogen molecule needs a special protein for the attachment in the first glucose, shown here in red. And starch molecule contains hundreds of glucose molecules in either occasionally branched chain, which is amylopectin, or unbranched chain, which is amylose. Dietary fibers also provide structure in plants, are very diverse, and cannot be broken down by human enzymes. Soluble fibers are viscous and can be digested by intestinal bacteria. And this property is also known as fermentability. These fibers are found in fruits and vegetables. However, for insoluble fibers, they are non-viscous and are not digested by intestinal bacteria. These fibers are found in grains and vegetables. Lastly, we're going to talk about fiber sources. Dietary fibers are found in plant foods. Functional fibers are health-benefiting fibers that are added to foods or supplements. Total fiber consider both dietary and functional fibers. Next is resistant starches. Resistant starches escape digestion and are found in legumes, raw potatoes, and unripe bananas. Phytic acid or phytate has a close association with fiber and binds some minerals. Thank you, that's all for me.
My part is digestion and absorption of carbohydrate. First part is carbohydrate digestion. This is the picture of the carbohydrate digestion. The carbohydrate digestion will occur in the buccal cavity, stomach, small intestine, and large intestine. In the mouth, salivary enzyme amylase will hydrolyze the starch into short polysaccharides and maltose. The time of food in the mouth are very short. Very little carbohydrate digestion takes place in the mouth. So, you can taste the change of food if you chew a piece of starchy food like cracker. In the stomach, gastric juice will continue to hydrolyze the starch, but its juice contains no enzyme to digest carbohydrate. Fiber linger in the stomach and delay the gastric emptying and provide a feeling of fullness. Next, in the small intestine performs most of the work of carbohydrate digestion. Pancreatic amylase, which is the major carbohydrate digestion enzyme, will hydrolyze the starch to disaccharides and monosaccharides. Then, disaccharide enzymes on the surface of the small intestine cell hydrolyze the disaccharide into monosaccharide. Maltase will hydrolyze the maltose to 2-glucose. Sucrase will hydrolyze the sucrose to the fructose and glucose, and lactase will hydrolyze the lactose to the galactose and glucose. Intestinal cell absorbs these monosaccharides. Next is in the large intestine. 4 hours after a meal, all the sugar and most of the starch have been digested. Only the fiber will remain in the digestive tract. The functions of the fiber is attract the water and soften the stools. The bacteria ferment some fiber in the stool. Next part is the carbohydrate absorptions. In the carbohydrate absorptions, the nutrient will usually take place in the small intestine. Glucose and galactose are absorbed by active transport, but the fructose is absorbed by facilitated diffusion. Monosaccharide, the end product of carbohydrate digestion, will enter the capillaries of the intestinal villi. Monosaccharide will travel to the liver via the portal veins. In the liver, galactose and fructose are converted to the glucose. Next part is the lactose intolerance. The symptoms of the lactose intolerance is bloating, abdominal discomfort, and diarrhea. The lactase deficiency will cause the lactose intolerance. This lactose intolerance will lower in the Scandinavians and Northern Europeans and will highest in the Southeast Asians and Native non-Americans. The way to prevent the lactose intolerance is dietary changes. The example of the dietary changes is increase the consumption of milk products gradually, mix dairy with other foods, spread dairy intake throughout the day, use of enzymes, and individualizations of diets. Thank you.
Is to supply the cells with glucose for energy. Glucose plays the central role in carbohydrate metabolism. The body will store the glucose as glycogen in liver and muscle cells. Storing glucose as glycogen. Liver will store the glycogen and release glucose into the bloodstream. After a meal, blood glucose rises. Liver cells will link the excess glucose molecules into long branching chains of glycogen through the condensation reaction. When the blood glucose falls, liver cells will break the glycogen into glucose and release into the bloodstream through the hydrolysis reaction. Glucose are available to supply energy to the brain and other tissues. If glycogen stores are depleted, the body makes glucose from protein. Making glucose from proteins. Amino acids can be converted to glucose to some extent when does not replenish depleted glycogen stores by eating carbohydrate. The body proteins were broken down to make glucose. The conversion of the protein to glucose is called gluconeogenesis. Adequate carbohydrate in the diet to prevent the breakdown of protein is called protein-sparing action. Make ketone bodies from fat fragments. An inadequate supply of carbohydrate, fat fragments combine with one another and forming ketone bodies. The accumulation of ketone bodies in the blood is called ketosis. The body can use glucose to make fat when carbohydrates are consumed excessively. The next is the maintaining blood glucose homeostasis. The first step is when a person eats, blood glucose rises, and the high blood glucose will stimulate the pancreas to release the insulin. The insulin will stimulate the uptake of glucose into cells and storage as glycogen in the liver and muscles. Insulin also stimulates the conversion of excess glucose into fat for storage. As the body's cells use glucose, blood levels decline. Low blood glucose stimulates the pancreas to release glucagon into the bloodstream. The next is the glucagon stimulates liver cells to break down glycogen and release glucose into the blood, and the blood glucose begins to rise. When the blood glucose can fall outside the normal range with hypoglycemia or diabetes. The first is the diabetes. Diabetes has two types, type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes. The type 1 diabetes is less common and no insulin produced. The type 2 diabetes is more common and the fat cells resist insulin. The next is the prediabetes. Is the blood glucose higher than normal but below the diagnosis and diabetes. Hypoglycemia is low blood glucose and often controlled by dietary changes. The next is the glycemic response. Is how quickly the blood glucose rises and elicits an insulin response.